put some respect on his name. I feel like as Kamaru Usman's career has progressed way past its prime, it's actually starting to age like fine wine, and people are starting to recognize how great Kamaru Usman truly was. This past weekend, he proved that he can still hang with the young and the best, as he dominated a young killer in Joaquin Buckley, who was on a deadly 6-fight win streak and did so at 38 years old, coming off a 3-fight losing streak himself and hasn't fought in over a year. Kamaru Usman hasn't had a win in almost 4 years, apparently had knees so bad he couldn't walk on concrete and was pretty much counted out in this fight. But Kamaru reminded everyone that he still got it and put on a wrestling masterclass and shut down Joaquin Buckley a vast majority of this fight. Which got me to thinking Kamaru Usman might be the most underappreciated former UFC champion, and ironically, people are starting to recognize that well after his championship reign. And it's crazy how he went from one of the most hated, underappreciated champions, like I said before, to definitely one that deserves some respect. I think it's about time to start putting respect on Kamaru Usman's name. Let's go back to a time when not a lot of people like Kamaru. It's 2019 and Tyron Woodley is the champion, but a young rising up-and-comer in Kamaru Usman is challenging that. Up until this point, Kamaru was extremely dominant, was on a 10-fight win streak, undefeated in the UFC, and was wrestle-fucking pretty much everyone he came across. This win streak included Rafael dos Anjos, Damian Maia, Sean Strickland, and a very young Leon Edwards. He was legit, but not a fan favorite. He didn't really have a fan favorite style, as he chose to wrestle and control his way to decisions a vast majority of the time, and he didn't really have a crazy personality to make up for it. So when he surprisingly dominated Tyron Woodley, people kind of had the same reaction when Bilal won. It kind of seemed like another relatively boring wrestler took over the division and was going to start a boring title reign, and boy were people wrong. His first title defense was against the interim champion at the time, Colby Covington, who, like Kamaru, was a dominant wrestler and stylistically wasn't really a huge fan favorite, but unlike Kamaru, had an insane and obnoxious personality that sold fights. I would assume everyone knows the story by now of Colby almost getting cut from the UFC because his style was boring, and how he added this crazy offensive personality to sell fights, and it worked. All eyes were on Colby and his first title fight with Kamaru Usman, and many thought this was going to be a relatively boring grapple fest because of both fighters' styles and decision rates. But for some reason, despite all of that, they came out and decided to box and go to war. Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 1 is still personally one of my favorite fights because of how surprisingly violent it was. Both guys had their moments up until the last round, and both were landing hard. But in the legendary 5th round, Kamaru would somehow pull ahead with a gigantic right hand that broke Colby's jaw, and then would ultimately finish the fight from there. This fight had everything, and he finished on top of that too. Was Kamaru finally going to gain respect with a performance like that? Was Kamaru going to finally be a fan favorite? The answer was yes, but just not now. During this time, around 2019, an actual fan favorite and a brand new star was starting to take over the UFC, and his name was Jorge Masvidal. I still remember the insane year Jorge Masvidal had in 2019 because it was the year I went from a casual fan to a pretty dedicated fan today. Masvidal first shocked the world by knocking out Darren Till as a huge underdog in enemy territory. And then he would add to his allure in that same night by getting into the now infamous brawl with Leon Edwards backstage and gave him an unforgettable 3-piece and a soda. But what would happen next would make Masvidal a legend, as in 5 seconds. 5 seconds is all it took for Masvidal to go from a journeyman to that guy that had that one upset to a legitimate star of the UFC. Everyone couldn't stop talking about this record-breaking knockout, and this performance mixed with his Miami Scarface personality made him a star. And this momentum would finally continue into his fight with another fan favorite, Nate Diaz, and would solidify the breakout year Jorge Masvidal had in 2019. So, everyone loved Jorge at the time, meaning when it was finally time to step up on short notice for the title shot during the pandemic, everyone was rooting for Jorge, and consequently, everyone was hating on Kamaru. And the performance Kamaru put on did not help this image. Knowing how deadly of a striker Jorge Masvidal was, and knowing how much better his wrestling was compared to Jorge, he played it safe and how everyone expected Kamaru to fight. He grappled a lot, clinched, foot stomped, and did everything in his power to nullify Jorge's power. Kamaru Usman clearly got the win, but lost the support of fans if he had any before this. And this was where truly, the fans started to hate Kamaru Usman because as good as he was, he had a boring personality, a boring fighting style, and committed the cardinal sin of beating a fan favorite, which many fighters, despite how good they are, will be hated if they beat a fan favorite, especially if they did it in a boring manner. With that Masvidal win, Kamaru was super hated and underappreciated by fans, but I think this fight would light a fire under Kamaru Usman, as after this, he became insanely violent and super entertaining. Next title defense was against #1 contender Gilbert Burns in the Apex, who was looking hot. He was on a 6-fight win streak and was a former training partner and friend of Kamaru. And Gilbert Burns really showed how good he was in that first round, as he had a flash knockdown over Kamaru in the first and put the champion under pressure early. But Kamaru would settle and find his shots after that, especially finding a giant right jab from the southpaw position that put Gilbert Burns down. And from there, Usman would finish the fight. I still get so sad seeing Gilbert cry as he got finished by a former teammate, but Kamaru did what he had to do. Anyways, this of course led to the rematch between Kamaru and Masvidal, and still, I think fans hated Kamaru just because of how the first fight went. So with a lot of fans rooting for the fan favorite to pull off the upset on the quote-unquote boring champion, he shut a lot of fans up with this literal, picture-perfect right hand down the middle. It was one of the most shocking KOs I've ever seen live. The quote-unquote boring wrestler shut the lights off of an exciting striker and no one knew what to think. Whether you were cheering for Kamaru or not, you had to give him respect. Sure, he beat Jorge the first time in a really boring fashion, but there was no denying he was probably the pound-for-pound best now with a knockout over Jorge Masvidal. Then after this, Kamaru definitively beat Colby in the rematch. No questions, no fake nut tap, just knocking down Colby and hitting him with punches that stopped Colby dead in his tracks. Sure, Colby Covington did have some moments like the momentary rock of Kamaru at the end of the round, but this was another solid win for Kamaru Usman. And presumably this was supposed to carry on for a very long time. His next opponent was Leon Edwards, a striker and someone who Kamaru already beat in the past, granted a very long time ago. But those first 4.5 rounds looked like the same outcome. Kamaru was running through Leon, controlling him, beating him up, and it looked like Kamaru was going to stay on top for a very long time until this happened. It's still one of the greatest last-second knockouts, if not the greatest, considering this was for the strap. It was a legendary moment that stopped a legendary run in its tracks. And in the rematch, surprisingly, Kamaru did not run through Leon with wrestling, as Leon showed great anti-wrestling, takedown defense, and overall great grappling improvement to definitively beat Kamaru Usman. And you'd think by this time, this is the end of Kamaru Usman, right? He loses the belt at an older age and he kind of fades out from the community. But this is precisely where he starts gaining a lot of respect. On 10 days' notice, Kamaru took on a young, hungry monster in Khamzat Chimaev. Literally everything was stacked against him. He was out of his prime. His knees were shot at this point. I think he told Rogan before this he couldn't even walk on concrete. He was in a new weight class at 185, and he was taking on one of the hottest prospects on, again, 10 days notice. He was probably supposed to be finished in the first round, but despite everything Khamzat threw at him, he survived. And not only did he survive that first round, he gave him work in the last 2 rounds, especially in that third. It was an insanely impressive performance from an out-of-prime 10 days notice Kamaru that had to be given respect. And just recently, Kamaru came back after not fighting for almost 2 years and came back against another killer in Joaquin Buckley, who was knocking everyone out and was on a 6-fight win streak. The bad knees didn't matter. His age didn't matter. Kamaru pummeled Buckley for 4 out of the 5 rounds and got a great win at such a late point in his career. I think these two great performances against young and dangerous killers, mixed with the boring championship reign of Leon Edwards, mixed with the inactivity of that division, made us really appreciate Kamaru Usman, especially during his prime. Okay, you can say he was boring during his come-up, maybe you can even say he was a bit cringy during his reign, but you cannot deny the performances he put up as champion and the activity he had as champion. He fought 3 times in 1 year. You can't say that about most other champions, especially this one, who barely fights during his championship reign. Outside of that one boring Jorge win in their first fight, every other Kamaru title defense was amazing. War with Colby Covington, KO over Gilbert Burns, KO over Jorge Masvidal, and another fun fight with Colby is a damn good resume. Add a very competitive fight with Khamzat Chimaev, and then on top of that, beating a young guy like Joaquin Buckley. You got to put respect on Kamaru Usman's name. Anyways, what do you guys think about Kamaru Usman? What do you think about his recent win over Joaquin Buckley? I think he should be as loved as Volk, considering they pretty much have very similar resumes, 5 title defenses, great wins later in their career. And I feel like Volk is so loved, but Kamaru kind of gets brushed aside. I think people are starting to respect him, but he has to be appreciated a little more. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for always supporting, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.